Willkommen allesamen. This video is going to be a great source for every European or European descendant that they should all watch. This channel here focuses primarily on Viking Age history and religion, and today, because of the mainstream media, the Norse religion is by far the most popular and quickly growing out of all the European native pagan spiritualities. And I think that's a bit of a shame, actually, because every single country, not just in Europe, but the whole world has an amazing, beautiful, pre-Abrahamic spirituality that you can all call the religion of your ancestors. And I think it's a great start to look into your own ancestry first and look into what your own ancestors believed in. Instead, what's actually happening is everyone thinks Vikings are super cool and they want to dress up and paint their face and look like a badass, and it's the easiest community to get into these days with all the cringy online groups. But this video here is just to let everyone know that there are other options. So today I'm going over every branch of the European native pagan religions. We can definitely say there were different cults and practices and smaller branches and time periods that were going to be different, and of course these various places and times practice their religions differently, but essentially we're looking at 6 branches of European native paganism. We have the Norse / Germanic, we have the Celtic, we have the Slavic, we'd add another one in there and say Baltic too. Greek and Roman, some people group these together as one category as the Hellenic, and I even add the Finn or Sami religion in there as well, which is not in the Indo-European language and cultural family, but it is still very much a part of the European native religion. And like I mentioned, I'm not an expert in all of these. The Norse Germanic is my main life focus of study, but I know enough about the other ones to at least point you in the right direction to some sources if you are interested in learning more and going down those paths. So first, the Norse paganism. We can also say the Germanic paganism. That's just, Norse is just a part of the larger Germanic paganism. I won't spend a lot of time here because I've got 400 plus videos now about all aspects of this religion, and I have not even covered 5% of all that there is to speak about and all the sources on Norse paganism. And like I said, Norse paganism, as was practiced in Scandinavia during the Viking Age, where we have most of our sources coming from, that's only a small percentage of the broader family of Germanic paganism, which was practiced in Scandinavia, Germany, Netherlands, England by the Anglo-Saxons, and Eastern Europe by the Goths, all of that, and all these other places where the Germanic peoples settled for a couple generations at least before they became Christian and integrated with the local populations. As far as the sources go on Norse and Germanic paganism, we really do have a lot. There is this common mantra going on online by the cringe pagans saying, oh well, we have no reliable sources and we don't actually know what the religion is like, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do whatever the hell I want, and then they read some Wicca book and then they call it Norse paganism. Well, that's all a load of shit. If you follow my channel, we have a plethora of reliable primary sources and some, semi-reliable secondary sources. We also have archaeological finds that confirm a lot of these things. We also have first-hand accounts of foreign chroniclers who had contact with the Norse and earlier Germanic pagan tribes. So we actually have a very good idea of what the religion was like and what they believed and what they practiced. So if you are interested in Norse paganism, it is a lot of homework. There's a lot of things we can read and sources we can draw from, but the sources are definitely there, and that is a great advantage we have. If you can manage to stay off the toxic Norse pagan Facebook and Reddit groups out there who are just echo chambers of posting a load of shit, if you can avoid those and stick to the actual historical sources we have, that's good news. We actually have a very good idea about how to practice the historical religion as best we can in the modern day and what they believed back then, and it is the easiest to get into, and you're never going to run out of things to learn about because there are so many sources on these things. Now, next one, Celtic paganism. completely different. We have much less reliable sources about what they believed in and how they practiced. But this is definitely the European pagan religion with the widest geographical area and widest time frame. Most of you watching here right now are going to have more Celtic ancestry than anything else, surprisingly enough. And I would really love to see more people looking into Celtic paganism. The Celts settled all these places and they practiced their branch of paganism all over for anywhere from going from a few hundred years to a few thousand years, depending on migration patterns and when they converted to Christianity. The problem is, though, there are very few written sources, so we have to rely mainly on the archaeology in most of these places to learn more. And the archaeology is really great because it gives us this common, Celtic culture. We're specifically looking at the burials. These Celtic type burials seem to be many, many thousands of years old, much older than the other pagan religions. But of course, we don't know that they were actually Celtic. They definitely wouldn't have called themselves Celtic, but it definitely seems like it was Celtic from the archaeology, that this was actually the oldest religion of Europe. So the Celtic regions of Europe, they were all Christianized relatively early. This is the problem. Starting about 2,000 years ago, to maybe as late as 1500 years ago, and that's before any written sources were taken down by the actual Celts. We do have some very old Celtic inscriptions that don't teach us a whole lot. They're quite cryptic. One thing great, though, is that there are quite a bit of Roman and Greek sources that wrote about the Celts, and that's first-hand accounts coming from Roman pagans as well. Mainly they wrote about the Celts of Gaul, which is modern-day France. We have a surprisingly decent amount of primary sources on things like Druids, Celtic pagan customs from around the same time. So this is great because we know more about what the original core Celtic culture and religion was like long before Christianity was imported to these places. As opposed to the Germanic religion, which 90% of the sources we have on that comes from Iceland 1,000 years after the prime Germanic tribal age and after the Christianization of Scandinavia. Other than that, for sources on Celtic religion, we are relying on things like songs and folk tales from much later on in time. There are folk tales and legends coming from as late as the Middle Ages, and these manuscripts come from Ireland and Wales mostly, which is where Celtic paganism survived the longest, along with parts of Scotland too, we can say. And they offer glimpses of Celtic mythology, philosophy, and law, and lots of other things. They are not going to be, those folk tales are not going to be the most reliable thing in the world, because a lot of them were written up to 1,000 years after the Celts in these areas were actually pagan. We definitely don't have as well detailed preserved of a Celtic mythology as we do have in the Norse or Greek pagan religion, for example. But a lot of people sneeze at these much old later on folk tales and consider them not a reliable source of Celtic religion. I disagree with this. I think all of these fairy tales and legends are often an even more reliable source than the mythology and the gods, because they are much less prone to change over the ages. Also, things like holidays and celebrations, we have a lot more of that preserved from the most ancient Celtic culture than we do in the Norse world, for example, where not a ton of traditions are preserved. So all of these holidays like Samhain or Lugnasad, they are valuable sources as well, even though they are first recorded long after the official Christianization of the Celts. Either way, I would love to see a lot more people get into Celtic paganism. We need more good minds in this and more scholarship and discovering those lost things. And it's honestly a part of most of your ancestry a lot more than the Norse and Germanic is. Just be aware, those sources are very fragmented, and it's going to be a lot of homework, and at the end of the day, you'll still have a lot of questions that aren't possible to answer. Next one, we can speak about the Greek and Roman paganism. So a lot of the scholars combine these two, and they refer to them both under the same umbrella term of Hellenic paganism, and this was the religion of Mediterranean Europe. The reason a lot of scholars combine these under the umbrella term Hellenic paganism is that they were so similar, and that we know so much of Roman paganism was influenced by the earlier Greek paganism. I disagree with that a little bit. I think they are different enough so that we can separate them. They aren't any more similar, in my opinion, than Norse and Celtic paganism, for example, and we call those two different branches. But anyway, for the purpose of keeping this video short, we can round the Greek and the Roman pagan religions together. We know about those basically everything we need to know. There are so many sources, reliable, first-hand primary accounts written down from Greek and Roman pagans, philosophers, religious leaders. It doesn't get any more reliable than those sources. And they don't only explain their beliefs, rituals, and other practices, but they give explanations as to why they did what they did and why they believed what they believed. Not only that, but we have sources that are like debate and discourse between opposing schools of thought and interpretations of the Greek and Roman religions. None of the other religions in Europe had anything like that, so we are truly blessed with the sources on Greek and Roman paganism. The sources we have on Greek paganism are the oldest out of all the European religions, going back almost 3,000 years. These works like the Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, and Hesiod's Theogony, the philosophical works of Plato and Aristotle from a little less than 2,500 years ago, and they are beautiful works. I must say, I look to these all the time, especially to help me fill in some of the blanks to Norse paganism, because the Greek works actually explain a lot of their beliefs instead of just recording their beliefs. And this is just a couple of the sources. There are dozens and dozens of great Greek sources. Roman paganism, they have a lot of good ones too. Writings from poets like Virgil and Ovid, historians like Livy and Tacitus. My favorite, though, is for sure Cicero, Nature of the Gods. If any of you are looking for a great read about paganism, there are many sources I like about Roman paganism too, but there are a lot of other sources that kind of get wacky and cringe pagan-y type stuff, or as I like to refer to it as, monotheistic polytheism. And what that is basically treating the gods like an all-powerful sugar daddy to suck up to and beg for silly favors, patron gods and all that stuff. That's what I have found in many, not all, but many of the sources on Roman paganism to be depicting this, monotheistic polytheism. And most of the cringe Norse pagans you are going to meet in Facebook and Reddit groups, Roman paganism is exactly what they are going to be looking for, even though they may not know it. See, what happened was when these Wicca people came into existence in the past 60, 70 years or so, they took a lot of what was present in Roman paganism and the sources we have on that, and they brought it into Wicca to help create that belief system. After that, some even bigger idiots took all that and imported it into Norse paganism, and they didn't read any of the sources on the actual Norse religion, and they did that. So that's actually what most pagans are going to be acting like today if they get all of their information on Facebook and Reddit. And by the way, I don't have anything against Roman paganism. And like I said, if that's your path, that's fine. And like I said, there are some wonderful sources on Roman paganism, but by the time most of these sources were written down, the Roman Empire had reached its peak, and they had all the toxic traits of a big civilization before it finally fell, and their spirituality was already long on the way down, and the average person of the time had completely lost the understanding of their religion. It was reserved for the religious leaders. They were the kind of gurus, and that's the kind of sources we don't really have a lot of. But before that, I'm probably talking I would say pre-Julius Caesar, so 1st century BC and before. At that time, Roman religion was probably beautiful, natural, deep, spiritual, animistic, and well understood by the regular person in a regular small village or tribe. It's just when civilizations get too big, people get too greedy, the general population becomes too dumb and disconnected from one another to really have these deep spiritual discussions with each other, and they lose the true understanding and meaning of their native pagan religion. This has happened pretty much everywhere in the world, and it's not any belief system that's the enemy. The enemy is civilization. But to sum it up, Greco-Roman, or say Hellenic paganism, that is the most reliable and best preserved religion that we have. Next one, Slavic paganism. This one is very underrated. I have more respect for the living tradition of Slavic paganism than I do the other native religions of Europe. Although the sources we have are not that many, they very much have a surviving tradition that seems to be relatively unchanged throughout the ages, even though some of these communities practicing the old pagan traditions in the Slavic parts of Europe, those people might not identify themselves as pagan, but a lot of those traditions and festivals they practice in some rural Slavic areas are very, very ancient and seem unchanged. Slavic religion, like the Celtic, is preserved mostly in medieval and later folk tales. We do have a couple sources, foreign first-hand accounts of Slavic paganism from about 1500 years ago or less. Byzantine historian Propicius. There's an Arab historian, Al-Masdudi. And we also have some things in the famous Primary Chronicle. They don't go into a ton of detail about the Slavic religion and beliefs in those sources, but it's cool to see sources about the Slavs when they were still pagan. That also confirms some of the later on folk tales that we have. And this is most of what we know on Slavic paganism. It's the same as Celtic. Most of it comes from sources much later on, written down after the Christianization of the Slavic peoples, which could reflect a Christian reinterpretation of the pagan beliefs and practices. So that's pragmatic. But like I said, these folk tales are not to be underestimated. We can't just throw the folk tales away as unreliable, especially when much of it agrees with the much older archaeological finds. Archaeological evidence, by the way, too, in courting sacred sites, idols, ritual artifacts, things like that, they reflect a more animistic nature than many of the other religions around Europe from the same time period. So it seems like pretty late on, actually, maybe even as late as 1,000 years ago or less in some places of Eastern Europe, it seems like the Slavs were still practicing their most true original animistic religion. That can't really be said about most other places in Europe at the same time, Norse included, by the way. And that, combined with the fact that they have a still pretty good surviving tradition, that's my favorite part about Slavic paganism. It's very on the low key, though. It's not so easy to get into a community as the other pagan religions that I've went over, and that's a good thing, because Slavic paganism in general seems to have avoided a lot of these extremist, far left and right, cringe pagan type people, infiltrating their way into the religion like they have done with almost every other native European pagan religion. Norse being the one who got the worst of it these days. So, if those Slavic beliefs seem something like maybe interesting to you, that might be a great way to go. I did a great podcast with The World Tree about Slavic paganism as well a while back that you can check out, and definitely his channel is a valuable source. Next one, often forgotten but very important, Baltic paganism. Baltic paganism is the one we know the least about by far, even though it is the one that survived the longest out of all the Indo-European religions. Up until the 1500s, Christian missionaries were still trying to convert parts of the Baltic countries. So that's when the sources are mostly from, and there's not much information going back older than that, except maybe a couple brief mentions in some Viking sagas or foreign chronicles. and of course the archaeological finds. But overall, again, most of what we know, the Baltic religion comes from the later on folk tales from there, the songs and still existing traditions, which by the way aren't very different to the Slavic and Finnish traditions and folk tales at all. But as always, those are not to be ignored, even though they come from a lot after the official Christianization of the area, especially when those sources agree with some of the archaeological finds, which unfortunately there's not a lot of those too. The Baltic religion is definitely the one that has been studied and examined the least out of all the European religions. But I think if they really tried and really sent some archaeologists around to some of these old sites, they would find some amazing things. So if you are maybe Eastern European or Baltic and you are ready to embark on a journey and pioneer and research and discover things that maybe no one else has done before, the Baltic paganism may be the right thing to you. Final religion of the video. This one is technically not in the Indo-European language or cultural family tree. They are actually more closely related to the polar cultures of Russia and Siberia than any cultures in Europe. But of course, they are a part of continental Europe and are a big part of our pagan history. This is the Finnish, the Sami, or Lap, whatever you want to call it. Today they are distinct peoples, distinct terms, but back in the Viking Age, or even going back 2,000 years to ancient Roman sources, all these people were referred to as the same thing. They were all Finns, or they were all Fenni, according to the Romans. The indigenous people of northern Scandinavia and Finland, and their paganism actually lasted the longest, all the way until the 1800s. And this is definitely the one we know the most about and have the most reliable and extensive sources on. As late as the 1800s, even though it was still very, very illegal by this time, there were still small communities and tribes practicing the most ancient animistic religion and rituals. Unlike the other European pagan religions, where we have to rely on some late on folk tales and some brief mentions of their religion in some foreign first-hand accounts, completely the opposite with the Finn or Sami religion. There were entire books published about their practices and beliefs. In the 1700s and 1800s, although there was still, a substantial effort at Christianizing these people at that time, their religion and practices were recorded with a genuine interest at that time. This is unlike all the records of the European religions that were recorded by the church and people trying to make the religions extinct and kill everyone practicing it immediately. With the Sami or Finn, it was scholars and anthropologists from Scandinavia, Netherlands, and beyond who would travel to the far north of Scandinavia to speak with these people and find out everything that they could, and they wrote it all down into long, detailed books, almost like doctoral theses, like proper research books. And they were published in quite a neutral and academic way that we can still read today. So this is a great source, and their religion, by the way, is closer to that of Siberian shamanism than it is to Indo-European religions. However, like I said, they were all so connected. The Vikings especially had great contact and relationships with the Sami, or Finn people as they called them, and they learned a lot of their magic and spirituality from them. So much that there was actually a word in Old Norse called Finnför, and that meant basically to take a journey to the Finns to do some kind of spiritual stuff, to ask about the future or learn magic. Sometimes chieftains would send their daughters, or princesses would go to the Finns and learn magic and the spiritual stuff like that. And pretty much all of their religion has been recorded for us to learn from, so we know a lot about it. The mythology, the gods, the rituals, the shamanism type practices, animistic beliefs, and even the folk tales and songs. There does seem to be some differences regionally in tradition and things like names and practices between, let's say, the Sami of northern Norway and the content in the Finnish poems Kalevala. There does seem to be some regional differences there, but yeah, it's still the same Finn Sami religion overall. And overall, it is the best preserved, and I'm so glad we have that as well. So if you are a person with maybe Northern European heritage, but the European pagan religions don't call to you so much, you're more interested in Eastern type shamanism, then the Finn Sami paganism might be the right one for you. So that's a little tip there. But that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know which ones you guys are most interested in. Like I said, I've done a lot of research on the Finn and Sami. Done quite a bit now on the Greek. I will be getting into the Celtic, but let me know if you guys are interested in any of these specifically, and I will try to do videos on that and research these things myself too, because that's what I'm interested in. We only have so much sources in the Norse beliefs, but if we combine that with other research about other pagan religions, neighboring pagan religions, we can use each other and build on it all together and use each other's information to fill in the blanks and truly find out the lost beliefs of our people. So that's all for today. Hope you enjoyed. Vi ses nästa gång.